G'day guys, Tillis20 here and welcome to the very last episode of Miami. It is indeed the last episode. We are wrapping up this project in this one last video. I was talking about extending this project out a little bit more in the last episode. I thought I had about 2 to 3 more builds left to do, but a few things changed my mind since I was last in this save game, and I've decided to wrap it up in this one episode. So to begin with, the builds that I wanted to complete was, I wanted to do this general filling in the gaps episode. I wanted to build the university, I wanted to do a big suburban expansion, and then I wanted to do the space station. I ended up doing all that in just this one episode, so there's quite a lot into this one build. The detail is fairly low. That was mostly because it is really hard to find the motivation to have higher detailed areas in a project that you're most probably not going to open up again. So really my main focus became trying to make everything feel complete, because doing the detailed stuff when your project is at its very last legs and you're not going to open up the game again, yeah, there's absolutely no motivation there. So that's probably a pretty good reason why this is the very last episode. And plus, that all just sort of came together really quickly. And I sort of just thought, you know what, let's just turn this into the one episode rather than extending it out for any longer. So it is, yeah, quite a dense episode with lots of work getting done in it. And then some other factors that influence that decision is the frame rate. Well, actually not the frame rate, but the performance in this save is just so terrible. The simulation speed is like on super slow-mo, and there's no way to increase it. And I think that's because I've got a lot of buildings growing in this city. There's a lot of sims. There's 70,000 at the moment, which is pretty high, but even in Marble Mountain, which is I want to say close to that, maybe it's not, but I've been up to those numbers before. But the performance in this is just so terrible, and you know, nothing is working how it should. And I'm very much a functional player. You know, I like to try and play the game as much as possible in terms of trying to get my services right, trying to make sure that I have enough education in places and enough garbage disposal in areas. But you know, when the simulation is running so slow and nothing is functioning, I lose quite a lot of motivation. So that was another really big factor. The simulation is just so slow. You can actually see, and I will actually crank it up to full speed in a little while, but the simulation just doesn't change. And this is sped up by about 600%, so that gives you a pretty good indication of how slow this like each day cycle is going through. I don't really know what's causing that. I just think it might be just a limitation with having a large city and a lot of things growing within the city. I think I've got into a city at 70,000 before, but not had this problem. So I'm not really sure exactly what's going on, but it's damn frustrating and it's an absolute mood killer. But look, to be honest, the project is done anyway. I mean, I say all these things, but really, there's not that much more to build. There were like a few little more detailed areas I could have built, and I could have spent longer building out some of these things that I built in this episode. But to be honest, I probably would have done this amount of detail on them anyway. They're still pretty detailed areas. But yeah, I mean, the project is done. I mean, this is the biggest city I've ever built. There is so much going on here. There are so many buildings, so many inhabitants. You just saw the magic spawn of a giant suburb just there that was built by Lucky Panda, one of my patrons, who yeah, did me an absolute solid by building in that area. And because I'd already built like a lot of those areas within this project, so he built that and it just looks so good. You'll see a bit more of that in the cinematics at the end, which go for a little bit of extra time just to show you some of those areas that we build, that we've been building over the last few months. And that too, this project actually went a bit longer than I expected, and that's not a bad thing. I really got into the swing of things, and it's really wrapped up quite nicely, which is quite fun, because you know, quite often, you know, when you get to the end of a project, or when you build all the things you want to build in a city, then that motivation runs out pretty quickly anyway. So to be able to get to a stage this far within a vanilla series is pretty great. So I'm feeling quite happy with the progress that we made and the way that the city looks at the end of this, because it's so complete and it's so massive. I never expected to use 81 tiles, but I did for some crazy stupid reason. So yeah, it's really just a much bigger project than I ever imagined. So yeah, that is a little bit of backstory for the reasons why this is wrapping up maybe a little bit faster than you expected, but like I said, this has actually been going on for much longer than I expected, and it is still the most completed city that I've ever done. So what we've been up to and what we're going to get up to. So far I have done a bit of filling in the gaps, and you know, this still technically is. I'm really just going through and adding in just some larger, like I'm filling in some massive areas, and quite quickly as well. I'm trying to stick with a lot of the suburban type of areas, because these are sort of a bit more out of the city. So, you know, trying to fill in a lot of those gaps with more suburban types of areas, and a couple more golf courses too. You'll see me place down. That seem to be a pretty common thing in Miami, and I feel like I needed to get a couple more of them. And now we're starting to put in the foundations for the university. So I did want to place a university in this project, but again, like, because this is running so slow, I don't think I even get any students in this university. And I recorded this episode over like 5 days. So that's a pretty good indication of how slow everything's going right now. And I would leave it, just the simulation running while I was having dinner or, you know, doing jobs around the house or whatever. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good indication of how everything is running in the city at the moment. But in terms of the university, I found it really fun trying to build this, you know, rather than thinking about building this in a detailed way. I tried instead to think about it in the context of the city and also how it looked around its surroundings. There's a bunch of different universities in Miami, but I just decided to take inspiration from this one location. In particular, this one, because I liked the way it sat amongst its environments. I really liked this parkland, and I thought it was a similar context for where I was building as well. You know, sort of close to the coastline. There's also this bay area, and I thought that would be a pretty nice mix for this area. So that's why I decided to build it here, and that's why I'm modeling off that university. But in saying that, the road layout's completely different. The building structures are completely different. It's really just taking inspiration and trying to see how I go. I am using a type of university that I haven't used before. I can't remember the name of this university, but there are 3 different types. And I've only built one university in Marble Mountain, but that's it. So yeah, it's kind of fun doing like a new university, even if it's very under detailed, and I'm like rushing it because I'm trying to fill in as much areas as possible. And by the way, I know it feels like I'm rushing at the moment, and that I am trying to fill in as much areas as possible because I hated what I was doing, but that's not the case. If anything, I was really enjoying this way of building. It's a way of building that I experiment with sometimes. I do it in Marble Mountain sometimes, and I guess like a lot of other projects, I will work at trying to fill big gaps really quickly in a somewhat detailed fashion. But really, like, this style of building is really quite enjoyable. I really enjoy, trying to be really strict with how long you spend in a particular area and trying to fill an area very, very fast, but trying to do it in a way that is still somewhat realistic. But really, it serves such a different purpose than doing the more detailed areas. These are very much backdrop places, and these are areas that still serve such a big purpose within your city, and it just allows you to build a city much faster and see it complete much quicker, which I think is a type of building that I do really enjoy. So again, it might feel like I'm rushing because I'm not enjoying myself, but really I loved doing this. This was a really fun way of building. But I think when it comes down to it, the simulation speed was really just the real motivation killer. And you actually even see that I've got it on pause at the moment, and that's because when I was building with it unpaused, the frame rate was so bad that I couldn't really do very much with it. So unfortunately, I've got to keep it on pause as I'm building. Particularly when I was doing any terraforming or any tree work. That's when I saw like a massive performance dip when I had the simulation running, but when I had it paused, it seemed to be pretty fine. You might also notice that down below I have now downloaded the super demand mod, which allows all my zoned areas to just fill up with people and businesses without having to have any sort of demand. You guys suggested that a couple of episodes ago, and yeah, that's a really, really helpful mod, so I'm really glad I'm using that. But you know, even still, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but even still, unpausing the game and letting it run, it would still take, I don't know, 5 minutes for the animation of the building to grow. So it was not exactly as easy as getting that mod and just watching everything grow instantly. It still took such a long time for that just to even spawn and grow buildings, which is just painful. So there's a lot of times where I'd just like leave the simulation running and I'd have dinner or go for a shower or do whatever and come back and just be like, oh, are you serious? Is that all that's grown? It was pretty painful doing this, but you know, at the same time, very, very satisfying seeing how it all unfolds at the end. What we're doing now is we're working on a very simple zoo. I wanted to create a kind of like a big parkland around this area, you know, where there's lots of like nature trails and, you know, lots of foliage, and I figured this was the sort of space to place around the outskirts of the city, and you know, we didn't really have a lot of parkland, so I thought that this was the best suit for this particular area. And it was actually quite a good one because it filled in a lot of space. Again, I didn't have to wait for things to grow. I could just actually place these things down. And I also thought that, you know, this would be a pretty good suit for my project, seeing that there wasn't a huge amount of green area. But, you know, we put it into green area, but now I'm putting in a bit of industrial because I thought we also needed a bit of that too. And there's also this train line, which I thought that this would make a bit of sense to have, you know, one last little bit of industry around this area and some cargo points too, because there's like a few areas where there's like cargo coming in and out of, but you know, we really could have used a few more. So I really just wanted to place down some warehouses. I've using the plop the growables mod just to place down my industry rather than waiting for them to spawn in this area. Also wanted to be a bit more particular about the types I wanted. And then I also thought that this would be a good spot for a little bit more of those pockets of water that you see a lot of in Miami. I wanted there to be a few around this area, and there was this one particular spot that I saw in an industrial area that I just took inspiration from, so I just placed that there. They're really quite unusual, these like pockets of water, and I get it because I know that Miami is quite a is quite a swampy place, and you know, there's quite a lot of there's quite a lot of water that sits on these lands. So I guess they're here for good reasons, but they're so interesting, and I just thought that I should probably place a few of them around these areas. So yeah, it's a pretty basic looking industrial area, but you know, I think it serves a pretty good function, and it also does a really good job at filling in a big bulk of space, particularly using these warehouses and these unique factories. Now I am working on some of the suburban areas around here. I also wanted to include some farmlands. We do already have a fair amount of farms on the other side of Miami, but I figured on this side would probably make sense as well. And I tried to get like a bit more of a better transition from the suburban areas into these more open space farmlands, and you know, these properties that are got a little bit more space than what it's like closer to the city. So I just tried to do a bit of that. It was pretty tricky, again trying to use zoning rather than using plop the growables, which was also a bit tricky, but you know, ultimately I think it turns out pretty decent, and the trees really sold its place. Fun fact, by the way, and I don't know if you've already noticed this, but you might, if you squint hard enough, you might be able to notice it on some of these buildings. But because a lot of my Simpsons assets from the Springfield series are locally saved, I forgot to like remove those buildings from my save file or my asset file when I loaded up Miami. So you will see a whole bunch of Flanders and Simpsons houses just spawning in those places. So I think that's kind of fun. Like when when I was I didn't notice it when I was playing, but then when I started taking the cinematics and got a little bit closer, I was like, oh, there's a lot of Flanders and Simpsons houses around here. So yeah, if you squint nice and close, you might be able to notice it, or that's just more incentive for you to wait to the very end, because I think you'd see it a little bit better in the end cinematics. But yeah, it's it was kind of annoying, and I was almost like, oh, better reload the save game and remove them, but I was like, stuff it, like, who cares? I bet these guys won't even notice unless I tell them, and then I told you anyway. Alright, now we are up to the final leg of this episode, and this is the final build that I wanted to do for the very last episode, and I figured this would be a nice finale. I also was really hoping to see this rocket launch at some point, but then when I clicked on it to see, you know, when it would launch, I had to get a certain amount of resources in this area, or like a certain goal. And I was like, okay, well, I'm sure that'll be fine, I can do that. But then I remembered that my simulation speed is so slow that there's absolutely no way I'm going to reach that goal. So unfortunately, you won't see any rockets launch. I am very disappointed about that, but honestly, the simulation is so slow that there's just no way you would ever be able to. I'd have to leave it running for forever, and it just would not happen. So unfortunately you won't see that, but you will see this space station unfold, which is my very first space station I have ever built in this game. First time I've even plopped down one of those space launch sites. And I did actually mention a couple of episodes ago that I didn't know huge amounts about this site. This is the JFK NASA facility. I think that's the name of it, but I didn't really know a huge amount about it. Still don't know a huge amount about it, but I was really lucky that someone got in touch. His name is Farshot, and he got in touch on Discord and said that he's really familiar with this location, and actually drew up an idea for the layout for this area that I could take inspiration from and get some ideas, which I'm really, really appreciative of, because I really didn't know how I was going to tackle this in somewhat of a realistic way. And then when I started working on this one build, you know, in this one episode, I was like, man, there's no way I'm going to be able to build this in this one episode. But yeah, Farshot really helps me out, so I really do appreciate that drawing, because I do follow it pretty closely in terms of layout. I do chuck in a couple of curveballs and do a couple of things my own way, but generally I'm trying to get the essence of what he drew up for me, because I think it's about as accurate and realistic as I could possibly get it without having to do some actual research for a change, rather than just going on Google Earth and quickly grabbing a couple of names. But what I wanted to include in this area, I wanted to have the Kennedy Space Center, but of course we are doing our own version. But then I'll also be including this Air Force Base too, but I think my version will be a bit more of just an army base, or it's gonna be something. But yes, we are definitely in the territory of just getting the general vibe down. Number one, I am working on something that I have pretty much like no knowledge on, so the motivation and the ideas flooding to me while I'm working on this is pretty limited. And also, this is like the last thing I was building within this project, so my motivation was just, you know, I was really, really like just looking at the finish line going, alright, come on, you've gone this far, finish the project. It is so hard at this moment. Like, it is really, really, really difficult to finish a city when it gets to these stages. I'm actually curious, have you guys gotten your city to a stage where it's like so complete that, you know, pretty much every square inch has been worked on and, you know, completed in a way that you're pretty happy with? Because this is about as close as I've gotten, and getting towards the end of it is very, very challenging. It's a marathon. But nonetheless, I do think that, you know, putting in just like the details that I do, even if it's like just super limited, like, you know, dragging these paths here and there, and, you know, putting down a little bit of surface painter, and, you know, actually manually placing down some of these buildings rather than zoning them out. You know, I think that by doing so, it's still somewhat feels, you get the vibe, but, you know, obviously not the detail, and it's like a completely different way of playing, which is fun in its own way, but so challenging. Like, it's so challenging at this stage, particularly with such vanilla assets, which I don't know if I'm going to do another it's like such a vanilla series, not for a while. I'm pretty keen to work with some more custom assets and see what else I can come up with. Now I'm starting to work on a little bit more of a detailed area as opposed to what I was doing before. This is a control center. So Farshot was telling me that like there's a whole bunch of like abandoned launch sites, and there's these bunkers that are right next to these launch sites where basically they would have the commands coming from those sites, and like that's like a pretty old school way of doing things, whereas these days it all comes from this one control center. So and he did mention it'd be really cool if I was to include this, which I totally agree. I think this is like a really nice little touch that I sort of nestled into the forest as well, which is quite fun. I ended up using these museum buildings, which work surprisingly very well. Like they are a very close looking building, and I just spliced a couple of them together and just dragged a couple of fences around. He did also mention that it is double fenced, so just quite a lot of security going on there. So I decided to add that little feature too. And now I am working on those abandoned launch sites that he was talking about, and we just wanted to put them on this peninsula. And what I thought would be an easy way of doing it was to basically create one of them and copy them over, and then just change a couple of the nodes and a couple of things here and there, rather than having to build each one individually. These things look pretty similar anyway, so just changing them, like little parts about them, is a much easier way of doing it. And you can also see I've added in that bunker that he was talking about too, which I thought was kind of fun. But I think this place really comes alive when I put in all the foliage and trees and stuff, which again, super keen to start working with some more custom trees, because these are vanilla ones, definitely don't cut it. Also, I forgot to mention that I'm using a lot of the surface painter and the resources to change the ground color a little bit. Not a little bit, quite a lot, I should say. The darker bits is where all the marshland is going to be, and I'll also be using the surface painter to just make a couple of areas just a little bit darker too. Something that I thought was an easy addition, but I think adds quite a lot, the addition of these pathways that I've got just sprawling across this whole area, which is something else that I noticed from this whole area is, there's quite a lot of pathways and little tracks going here and there. But like I said, this place really comes alive when I add in the foliage, which is generally the case with everything that I build. I think that it always looks so much better when you add in the trees, and this is no exception. Of course, this would probably have way more lower lying shrubs, but from a distance, these look quite low down anyway, even though they are some of the more medium size. Well, they're still pretty small trees, but I'm probably going a little bit heavier than you'd imagine around launch sites and army bases and stuff like that. But I couldn't help myself. I think that if you're gonna use these areas and completely finish up these areas, you need to add in the foliage, otherwise it doesn't really look complete. But guys, I mean, that is pretty much it for this episode, this project for Miami. It is, I mean, I know it sounds like I'm rushing to get it finished, but it's really just the nature of finishing a project. It's always very, very hard at the end of it. But I have really enjoyed this project, even though it's been a challenge using such vanilla assets and working with the limitations of the game when it comes to performance. But really, it has been a lot of fun. But it is now time for some new projects. I am slowly working on another one which won't be out for quite a while, but yeah, there's still another project in the works, and I'm pretty excited to share it with you guys, even if it's ages away from being shown. Before I head off, I do want to say a special thanks to some of my patrons: Lewis Jones, Zhang Xiang, Colton Bloisk, Josh Goring, Miko, Christian Compton, and Joseph Diaz. Thank you all so much for your support. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!